The music was supposed to start at noon, but the river wind kept tangling the ribbons, and the bridesmaids' laughter sounded too rehearsed. I stood near the back of the tent, a full head taller than most of the guests, the ribbons of my uniform catching light like thin blades. They had asked me to wear something simple, something that would not draw attention. I wore the uniform anyway. It was not vanity. It was memory stitched into fabric. My sister Caroline floated between tables in a white silk gown, waving like a politician greeting donors. "My husband's a major," she said for the 5th time, her voice lifted so everyone could hear. "He commands people for a living." The guests clapped politely. One woman leaned closer to me and whispered, "And you, dear, what do you do now that you're retired?" The words stuck like dust on my tongue. I smiled because soldiers are trained to smile when civilians misfire. My mother's eyes met mine from across the room, an unspoken order. "Stay quiet, don't ruin this." The photographer asked the family to gather near the dais. My name was missing from the printed program. I watched the MC stumble over introductions, thanking the bride's wonderful family. No mention of the daughter who had spent 30 years in service, who'd buried friends in 2 deserts, who had signed more commission packets than wedding cards. The omission felt deliberate, polished. I sipped water to hide the tightening in my jaw. Caroline came over, cheeks flushed. "Meredith, could you sit with the vendors? Maybe?" The front rows are for immediate family. Her perfume was sweet, the kind worn by people who never had to crawl through sand. "Of course," I said. My chair was next to the sound technician and the coffee urn. It gave me a clear view of the stage and of Ethan Hayes, the groom the major she had married. He was checking his cuffs, straightening medals he had not earned in blood but in years. Recognition flickered in his eyes when he saw me. I could see the memory forming. The signature at the bottom of his commission letter, the initials M.L. Vaughn, written in the same pen I carried in my breast pocket now. He looked away. The ceremony began. The chaplain spoke about family as foundation and service, as sacrifice. Caroline smiled at every sentence that made her look pure. When the vows ended, the MC took the microphone again. "Let's thank the brave men and women in uniform with us today." Applause scattered like weak rain. They thanked the groomsman, the band's drummer, who once served 2 months in reserves. Not me, not once. My mother clapped hardest. I almost laughed. When the reception started, I moved toward the exit, planning to leave quietly. Then the projection screen behind the couple began showing photos, childhood pictures, Caroline at the beach, Caroline at prom, Caroline hugging Ethan in his fatigues. The crowd cooed. A photo flashed briefly, me in dress blues, arm around Caroline after her high school graduation. It disappeared as fast as it came, replaced by Caroline at a parade. The cut was clean, surgical. Someone had edited me out. I turned to leave. A hand touched my shoulder. Ethan stood there, posture rigid. "Ma'am," he said softly. His voice carried across the tent. Conversations paused. Glasses stilled mid-air. "Ma'am," he repeated louder now, "you signed my commission." The silence that followed had weight. Caroline's smile faltered. My mother's hand froze around her wine glass. The guests looked between us, calculating ranks they did not understand. Ethan straightened heels, clicking together. "Permission to thank you publicly," he said. My throat tightened. I nodded once. He saluted, precise regulation, perfect. The sound of his heels on the wooden floor echoed like gunfire. I returned the gesture slowly. Around us, the laughter collapsed. The MC fumbled with his cue cards. Someone whispered, "She's his superior." Caroline whispered to no one. "She's supposed to be invisible." I wanted to leave her that invisibility, but silence had served them long enough. I lowered my hand and said evenly, "Major Hayes earned his post through merit and review. I only verified the truth." Then I turned toward the photographer and added, "Make sure you capture this one. It's the only real salute in the room." That line broke the air. A few veterans at the bar stood and saluted too. The camera flashes multiplied. My mother looked away. Caroline's bouquet slipped from her hand petals, scattering like shrapnel on the floor. In that moment, the river wind quieted the flags, along the pier straightened, and the crowd remembered that respect is not inherited through marriage. It is earned signature by signature. The smell of coffee was sharp that morning, mixed with the faint trace of lemon polish my mother used on every surface she could control. 2 days before the wedding, the house in Virginia Beach looked like a museum curated for judgment. Every cushion aligned, every photo frame tilted toward Caroline. She had sent me an invitation weeks earlier, embossed and perfect, the kind of stationery that screams effort. I had placed it on my desk at Fort Belvoir between 2 folders marked commissioning approvals. I had not noticed until then that one of those files bore the name Ethan Hayes. At the time, he was just another candidate, his record clean as commanding officer vouching for his leadership. I had signed without a second thought. Now, sipping coffee in the same kitchen where I had once learned to salute with a wooden spoon, I wondered if that signature had already tied me to a story I did not yet understand. Caroline was in the living room rehearsing her laughter. Stress, she said, that's why Meredith retired early. The military was too much. My aunt nodded like it was gospel. My mother poured more coffee into my cup without looking at me. It's better this way, she said softly. People don't need to know the details. The details. 30 years of service reduced to one word. I stirred the cup just to have something to do with my hands. The meeting at Belvoir had ended only 12 hours earlier. I had briefed 3 colonels, reviewed 15 promotions, and countersigned 6 new appointments. One of them was Major Hayes. The ink had barely dried when Caroline's text arrived. Don't be late for rehearsal dinner. Her messages always read like orders she believed I should follow. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, seagulls fought over crumbs near the mailbox. Caroline's voice carried from the next room telling a cousin how I had burned out. The phrase landed like an insult disguised as pity. When I entered, the conversation shifted instantly. She smiled too wide, her engagement ring catching the light. Meredith, she said, we were just talking about your work. My mother's look warned me not to correct her. I smiled anyway, the kind of tight smile that fits under a helmet. Caroline leaned forward. You're bringing a guest, right? Someone. Civilian. Her tone turned sweet like spoiled fruit. No, I said. I'm coming alone. Good, she said quickly. It keeps the seating simple. The room fell quiet except for the sound of her phone buzzing with messages. She had a new habit of tilting the screen away from me. Mom, she called out, make sure Meredith doesn't wear her uniform, please. It's too formal. We want harmony. My mother nodded as if she had already rehearsed the line. Yes, she said, a simple dress will be better. It will make Caroline more comfortable. The words felt like a sentence passed down. I looked at them both, one pretending this was about style, the other too proud to see the cruelty in it. My hand rested on the table, fingers tapping the grain to steady my breathing. Harmony, I repeated. That's important. My mother exhaled, relieved that I had complied. In the silence that followed, the air thickened with unsaid things. Later that afternoon, I walked down to the beach behind the house. The tide was low, the sand cool under my shoes. I thought of the briefing room at Belvoir, the fluorescent lights, the way young officers stood straighter when I entered. They called me ma'am with respect, not fear. Here, every word felt smaller. I sat on the pier and read the invitation again. The typography was elegant, the details flawless, until my eyes caught one small line, Ms. Meredith Vaughn. No rank, no service title, no acknowledgement of 3 decades spent carrying the flag into places where it was not welcome. I laughed quietly because it was almost predictable. When I returned to the house, Caroline was in the kitchen with our mother. Their voices dropped when they saw me. I reached for a glass of water. I just want this weekend to be peaceful, Caroline said. That's all. I know how intense you can get about titles. Titles, I asked. She shrugged. You know what I mean. You don't have to prove anything here. You're family. I looked at her and thought of every soldier who had died with no family left to remember their names. Proving had never been about ego. It was about legacy. That night, when they went to bed, I stayed in the living room. The photos on the mantel told a story that excluded me. Caroline's college graduation, her first car, her engagement. In every frame, my mother's smile was full proud. I turned one picture slightly to the side, just enough to break the symmetry. It was a small rebellion invisible to anyone who wasn't looking closely. In the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed. I opened the drawer where my mother kept stationery and pulled out one of the spare invitations. The same neat cursive, the same golden border, the same lie. I took a pen from my pocket and wrote under my name, Brigadier General. Then I folded it back and placed it exactly where I found it. The next morning I heard my mother speaking in the kitchen, her voice hushed. "Don't mention her rank," she told Caroline. "It makes you uncomfortable." Caroline's reply was light, almost cheerful. "I know, Mom. It's fine. She likes to feel important." I stood at the top of the stairs, unseen. The sun hit the window, reflecting on the silver of my service ring. For a moment, I considered walking away, skipping the wedding, letting them have their small victory. But something heavier settled in my chest. It wasn't pride. It was the quiet certainty that some lessons have to be taught in public. I turned and went back to my room. On the dresser lay my uniform, freshly pressed ribbons, aligned. The smell of starch filled the air. I ran a finger along the collar, the insignia cool against my skin. Outside, Caroline's laughter floated up the stairs, bright and hollow. I folded the invitation once more, slipped it into my jacket pocket, and whispered to the empty room. Harmony can wait. The fluorescent lights at Fort Belvoir never slept. They hummed like a distant engine as I stepped into the command office just after dawn. The wall clock read 06:47. The air smelled of toner and burnt coffee. My aide, Captain Morales, already had the day's packets stacked in order. 23 folders each, representing a life about to be changed. I hung my jacket on the hook beside the flag and sat. "These are ready for signature," Ma'am Morales said. His tone was neutral, but I caught the slight tightness around his mouth. Everyone always spoke a little softer when the paperwork involved careers. I flipped open the first folder, reviewed the evaluations, recommendations, and psychological clearances. My pen moved steadily. Rank review approve. Each signature a quiet oath. Morales watched me finish the 12th one before clearing his throat. "There's a Hayes in there," he said. Major Ethan Hayes. Infantry. The name struck somewhere deep, though I couldn't place it at first. "Hayes," I repeated. "Yes, ma'am. Good record. He's marrying a Caroline Vaughn this weekend." My hand froze mid-stroke. The ink bled slightly on the signature line. I looked up slowly. "Repeat that. Caroline Vaughn." The guest list was printed in the local paper. Small world. He smiled without realizing what the words meant. I closed the folder carefully. The photograph clipped inside showed a man with clear eyes and the practiced confidence of someone who had never been tested too far. My initials were already on his prior evaluation. I read the final endorsement again. Approved by Brig. General Meredith Vaughn. The sentence felt heavier than the others. My breath left in a quiet exhale. "Continue the cue," I said. Morales nodded and stepped out to fetch coffee. Alone, I looked around the office. The walls were lined with commendations maps, the framed photo of my last deployment team. The one face missing was Caroline's. She had always refused pictures in uniform, said they made her look severe. Severe had been the family word for anything that couldn't be controlled. I traced the edges of the folder. The coincidence was too precise. I remembered Caroline at 23, laughing too loudly at a barbecue wrapped around a man from my unit named Jason Wells. She had pursued him after seeing his picture in my team photo. When I asked her why, she said, "Because you get all the attention and I want to see what it's like to be the one chosen first." That was the last time I had introduced her to anyone I worked with. Wells left the service 6 months later after disciplinary review. Caroline called it bad luck. I called it calculation. The memory pressed down like humidity. I closed my eyes for a moment. Outside, the training field echoed with the bark of commands. Life went on in rhythm orders given, orders obeyed. I opened the next packet. My handwriting was calm again. The line approved by Brig. General Meredith Vaughn appeared on every page, black and final. Morales returned, setting a cup beside me. "Sir from admin left this," he said, handing over a small envelope. Inside was a folded note from my mother. She preferred old-fashioned methods, as if handwriting softened the message. The script was elegant but sharp. "Don't embarrass Caroline by showing up in uniform." I stared at the paper until the words blurred. The smell of ink and coffee mingled, bitter and metallic. I slipped the note into the drawer without a word. Morales hesitated. "Everything all right, ma'am, fine," I said. "Proceed with the next batch." He nodded and left again. The silence that followed was thick, almost physical. I finished the last signature just before noon. When I pushed the stack forward, my hand brushed the top folder again, Hayes Ethan M. I opened it one last time. His record was impeccable. Awards for tactical leadership, clean behavioral reports, multiple deployments. He had earned his rank. I had no reason to deny him, no professional justification to pull the file. Still, the coincidence sat like a stone in my chest. I flipped to the back and saw the approval chain. Division Commander Personnel Review, then my own name. The ink gleamed under the fluorescent light. I signed it again, slower this time, adding a deliberate curl to the final letter. It was less about authority and more about reclaiming ownership of my name. When Morales returned, I handed him the folder. "Deliver these to HQ." He nodded, collected the stack, and left the room with the quiet precision of someone who knew not to ask questions. I sat there long after he was gone, listening to the hum of the building. The digital clock on the wall ticked forward, indifferent. At 13:20, my phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. "Mom says, don't forget your speech for the rehearsal dinner." There was a smiley face at the end. I typed back one word, "Copy." Then I locked the screen and leaned back. Through the window, the Potomac shimmered under gray clouds. A helicopter cut across the horizon blades, slicing the air in steady rhythm. For a moment, I envied its clarity of direction. My reflection in the glass looked older than 52 lines, deeper eyes steadier. 30 years in uniform had taught me that silence could be more decisive than argument. Still, as I sat there, something began to harden inside me. Not anger exactly, but recognition. There are battles you choose, and there are ones that find you through bloodline and circumstance. This was the latter. I reached for the folder one last time, pulled out the signature page, and stared at the line beneath my name. Approved by Brig, General Meredith Vaughn. The title looked almost defiant now, like proof against erasure. I slid the folder back into its envelope and whispered the words that had carried me through 100 missions. Stay on target. Then I stood, buttoned my jacket, and walked toward the operations wing. Outside, the afternoon brief was beginning the corridors, alive with clipped footsteps and radio chatter. The world of command did not wait for family or feeling, but beneath the steady order of it all, I knew something had already shifted. The next time I heard that name, Major Ethan Hayes, it would not be in a personnel file. It would be at an altar wrapped in vows and silence. The Harbor Club in Norfolk looked like a postcard, all glass walls and soft jazz. The water beyond the windows caught the last of the sun, turning the river gold. Inside, the staff moved like clockwork trays of champagne gliding through the air, the scent of butter and lilies mixing with expensive perfume. I had worn the civilian dress Caroline requested, simple black, no insignia, no ribbons. Even without the uniform, I felt the discipline in my shoulders. The name cards gleamed under candlelight. Mine read, Ms. Meredith Vaughn. Not general, not even retired. Just Ms., the smallest cut but well aimed. Caroline floated through the room like she owned the tide. Everyone she called this is my sister Meredith. She works as an office coordinator at the Pentagon. The word coordinator hung there, delicate and deliberate. A man at the next table chuckled. So do you ever meet real soldiers? His tone was curious, not cruel, but it landed like a slap. Before I could answer, Caroline smiled sweetly. She left the service long ago. She's happier now. Laughter rippled around the table, light and polite. Hayes was standing near the bar, hands in his pockets, expression unreadable. His uniform fit too neatly for someone who had spent years in it. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw it happen, the flicker of recognition, the slow calculation, the realization of where he had seen my name before. I looked away first. My mother arrived late carrying a bouquet wrapped in tissue paper. She kissed Caroline on the cheek and handed the flowers to her. "Don't bring work tonight," she told me as she passed. "This is family." The word work sounded like a warning, as if the mention of command could stain the evening. I smiled faintly. "Copy that," I said, though no one heard. The waiter poured wine into my glass. Around me, conversations swelled about honeymoons and house hunting, trivial things that seemed enormous to people who had never moved 18 times in 30 years. Caroline's laughter was the loudest sound in the room. Hayes stayed quiet, answering questions in clipped phrases. When a guest asked where he had served, he said Kandahar and changed the subject. I watched him measure his responses, careful, calculating. I could almost see the file in front of me again, the neat boxes of service dates, the commendations written in other people's handwriting. Caroline leaned closer to a woman beside her. "We might move to D.C. after the wedding," she said. "Ethan has connections. I told him the Pentagon could use a softer touch." The woman laughed. "Maybe your sister can get you in." "Oh, Caroline said she's not that kind of important." The room chuckled again. My mother reached for her glass, pretending not to notice. I stared at the tablecloth, its perfect crease down the middle, the faint scent of starch reminding me of inspection mornings. I thought of the soldiers whose names I had signed that week, each one stepping into responsibility, each one carrying weight Caroline would never understand. Hayes moved toward our table, glass in hand. "Caroline," he said softly, "they're ready for your toast." She smiled and stood. Before we start, she said, "I just want to thank everyone for coming, especially my family who always taught me that success is about knowing when to step back." The guests laughed again, oblivious to the edge in her words. I raised my glass, not in approval, but as armor. Hayes watched me over the rim of his drink. The pianist started playing something soft and romantic. After the speeches, the music grew louder, the crowd looser. I drifted toward the balcony for air. The harbor lights shimmered below reflections, stretching like silver ropes. Hayes followed a few steps behind, stopping beside me. For a while, neither of us spoke. The breeze carried salt and distant laughter. He cleared his throat. "General," he said quietly, the word barely audible over the music. I turned my head slightly. "You signed my packet." His voice carried the weight of confession. I met his eyes. "Then make sure you earn it." He exhaled slowly, as if releasing something he had held too long. "She doesn't know, does she know?" I said, "and she doesn't need to." The silence between us stretched. Inside, Caroline was telling a story about how she rescued a stray cat during her time volunteering for a veterans charity. Every sentence was designed for applause. I watched Hayes' jaw tighten. "She told everyone you retired because of stress," he said quietly. "She said the military broke you." "That's her version," I replied. "People prefer stories that make them comfortable. You could correct her." "Why?" I asked. "Truth doesn't need an audience." He nodded once, but his eyes flicked back toward the crowd. "She means well," he said, though. The conviction was thin. I studied him for a long moment. "Major," I said evenly, meaning well, is not a defense. It's a strategy. He looked away, pretending to study the water. I finished my wine and set the glass on the railing. "Tomorrow," I said, "you'll stand beside her and promise to protect what she values. Just make sure integrity is one of them." He opened his mouth to speak, but I was already walking back inside. The warmth of the room hit me like static. Caroline was posing for photos, her hand on her hip head tilted toward the camera. My mother caught my arm as I passed. "Where were you?" she asked. "Just outside." "Don't disappear tomorrow," she whispered. "You'll make her nervous." "I wouldn't want that," I said. The photographer called for a family shot. Caroline gestured for me to stand at the edge of the frame. I obeyed the way one does in a uniform even when unarmed. The flash went off. For a split second, everyone smiled. Then it was gone. The evening wound down. Guests began to leave the staff clearing plates and folding linens. I waited until the last of the laughter faded, then walked to the exit. The night air was cool, the city lights reflected in the water like distant flares. Behind me, I heard Hayes's voice again, low and uncertain, saying something to Caroline that made her frown. I didn't look back. Some truths are meant to arrive slowly the way dawn overtakes fog. I stepped into the parking lot, started the engine, and whispered the only order I trusted myself to give hold position. The ocean outside the hotel windows was still gray when I woke a thin mist rolling over the dunes. It was barely 7, the kind of morning that smells like salt and linen. My uniform hung on the closet door, the fabric pressed to precision, the silver shoulder boards gleaming in the low light. Caroline's message from the night before blinked on my phone. "Please, no uniform tomorrow. It ruins the color scheme." I had not answered. Instead, I had laid the uniform out piece by piece like ritual. The jacket, the ribbons, the gloves folded once. There are moments when obedience becomes complicity. I had learned long ago when to decline quietly. By the time I reached the hotel lobby, the staff were already adjusting floral arrangements. The manager, a young woman with polite nerves, spotted me and hurried over. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, eyes flicking to the silver on my shoulders. "They told us no uniforms." Her voice was apologetic, as if she were repeating someone else's order. I smiled. "Then consider this a civilian attending in tradition." She hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside. The air smelled of roses and floor polish. Outside, the sea wind pressed against the glass doors like an uninvited guest. The ceremony space faced the shore rows of white chairs, fanning out toward the arch where vows would be spoken. I arrived early enough to see them adjusting the microphones, testing the sound. My mother was already there, instructing the planners on centerpieces. She froze when she saw me. "Meredith," she whispered, "I told you. Caroline will panic." I adjusted my cuffs. "She'll survive." "You look intimidating," she said. "That's the idea." The sunlight broke through clouds just then, a sharp beam catching the silver thread on my sleeve. For a second, the reflection lit the aisle. I took my seat near the front. 10 minutes later, one of the planners approached me with forced courtesy. "Ma'am, we've had a last-minute change in seating," she said. "Mrs. Vaughn asked if you wouldn't mind moving to the table near the side door. It's closer to the exit if you need to take calls." I almost laughed. "Of course," I said. "Efficiency is important." The new table was half hidden behind a column. I could still see the stage, but barely. My mother mouthed "thank you" from across the room. Guests began to arrive, a blur of pastel dresses and polished shoes. Caroline appeared at the top of the stairs, glowing in manufactured perfection. She looked at me only once, her expression unreadable, then turned away, as if directing a play. The groom stood waiting, posture stiff, jaw set. Hayes looked every inch the officer in dress uniform, though his eyes betrayed a different kind of awareness now. The ceremony began. The officiant spoke about faith, about unity, about families coming together. The words rolled over me like static. The guests murmured and smiled. My glass of water sweated in my hand. When the MC took the microphone to introduce the families, I already knew what was coming. "Let's welcome the wonderful family of the bride," he said brightly. "Mrs. Eleanor Vaughn, Sister Caroline's maid of honor, and of course the new Mr. and Mrs. Hayes." There was no mention of me. The omission was not an accident. I set the glass down, the condensation leaving a perfect circle on the tablecloth. My voice stayed low, but the words carried. "Noted." The man at the next table glanced at me, uncertain whether he had heard right. I smiled politely, the kind of smile officers use at briefings when someone forgets their rank. The ceremony moved on. The vows were exchanged, the applause polite and endless. I watched the sea beyond the arch, its surface trembling under wind. Somewhere out there, ships moved unseen, quiet and steady, built for purpose rather than show. Caroline kissed her husband, raised their joined hands to cheers. My mother wiped her eyes. The photographer shouted instructions. "Family of the bride, please gather." My mother hesitated before gesturing toward me. Caroline shook her head almost imperceptibly. The photographer waited. I stayed seated. Hayes's eyes flicked toward me for a heartbeat, then back to her. The camera clicked. Applause again. The reception followed seamless as a scripted play. Waiters refilled glasses, laughter layered over music. I sat through it all composed, every movement measured. It was easier than combat, harder than solitude. The speeches began. Caroline thanked everyone for their support for making this day about love and renewal. When she looked my way, her smile didn't reach her eyes. "And thank you," she added sweetly to my sister, who taught me that sometimes stepping back allows others to shine. The crowd laughed. My mother clapped. I raised my glass, once more silent. Across the table, a retired colonel I vaguely recognized leaned forward. "You served?" he asked. 30 years, I said. "Ah, logistics command." He blinked, searching my face for humor. "Well," he said, "finally thank you for your service." I nodded. The music resumed, the dance floor filled. The ocean outside had turned deep blue, the horizon blurring with evening haze. I caught my reflection in the window, dark fabric, silver trim eyes steady. Every woman in uniform learns to master stillness. It disarms more than confrontation ever could. Hayes approached once mid-song, pausing beside my chair as if to say something. Caroline called his name from across the room, and he turned back instantly. I finished my drink and placed it on the tray of a passing waiter. As the applause swelled for the couple's first dance, I stood quietly, adjusted my jacket, and walked to the balcony doors. The wind met me with the chill of the sea. Below, waves struck the pilings in rhythm. The sound was clean, unpretentious. Behind me, someone whispered, "She looks like she's inspecting the troops." Maybe I was. The discipline never leaves you. It just changes targets. The moon had risen when I finally turned back inside. The applause had ended. Caroline was surrounded by admirers, my mother beside her. Hayes stood alone for a moment, then caught my eye. He nodded once the barest acknowledgement. I returned it. Tomorrow would come, and with it the reckoning silence always promises before it breaks. The ceremony began under a sky too blue to be trusted. The chairs were perfectly aligned ribbons trembling in the wind. The ocean behind the altar shimmered with that deceptive calm the Atlantic wears before a storm. Guests whispered and adjusted sunglasses, the sound of small talk blending with the distant gulls. The MC tapped the microphone, smiling too wide. "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for Major Ethan Hayes, United States Army." Applause broke out, polite and rhythmic. Hayes stepped forward in his dress uniform, shoulders squared, every motion textbook. Caroline reached him halfway down the aisle, her gown catching light, like ice. Her smile was the kind people wear when they are sure they have won. From the second row, I watched in silence. My uniform felt heavier in the sunlight, the metals warm against my chest. Caroline's friends filled the front rows, their perfumes mixing with salt air. My mother sat rigid beside them, pretending not to glance at me. When Caroline and Hayes joined hands, the officiant spoke of loyalty and devotion, words that belonged in a manual, not in a performance. Caroline looked at the audience as she repeated her vows, savoring each syllable. Hayes's voice was steady, practiced. When he said "I do," the crowd sighed as if on cue. Then came the kiss, long enough for photographers to catch from every angle. My mother clapped first. Someone near me whispered, "Her sister works HR at the Pentagon." Right. The phrasing made me smile, a quiet, bitter curve of the mouth. HR, the simplest way to erase 30 years of command. The air shifted. Hayes turned his head just slightly and saw me. The recognition hit him like recoil. I was standing now, not to draw attention, but because instinct told me to rise. Posture, straight hands at my sides, eyes forward. No smile, No applause, only the quiet gravity of attention earned. The ceremony continued, but the rhythm changed. Hayes's gaze flicked back to me, twice the set of his jaw tightening. Caroline noticed his distraction and squeezed his hand harder. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife. Applause again, louder this time, covering unease. The photographer called for them to face the crowd. Flashbulbs exploded. Caroline waved, basking in approval. Hayes's eyes found me once more, and for the first time, he hesitated. The applause faded. He stepped down from the platform, the sound of his boots sharp on the wooden floor. The guests began to quiet. Something in his movement drew their attention. He walked past the first row, then the second, stopping in front of me. The wind lifted his cap ribbon. He straightened his spine heels together. The silence spread like water, finding cracks. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying across the tent. Every conversation died. Every head turned. "Ma'am," he repeated louder, "now she's signed my commission." The world froze. The photographers lowered their cameras. The officiant blinked. Caroline's hand, still clutching her bouquet, fell slightly. My mother's face drained of color. The sentence hung there, clear, irrevocable. A woman near the aisle gasped softly. Someone whispered, "Wait, you mean, she outranks you." The words rippled through the crowd. Hayes didn't move. He stood at full attention, salute perfect, eyes forward. My own hand rose slowly in return, the motion steady, ceremonial. The air between us felt electric charged with every unspoken truth that had been buried under family manners. I met his eyes. "Not anymore," I said quietly. He earned it. The answer carried farther than I expected. It reached the back rows where the curious strangers sat, where the laughter had lived a moment ago. For an instant, no one breathed. Then the applause returned, but it sounded different now. Not polite, not rehearsed. Real. The kind that comes from recognition, not affection. My mother looked at the ground. Caroline's bouquet slipped from her hands. The petals scattered across the aisle, pale and weightless. Hayes lowered his salute and stepped back. The MC cleared his throat, voice trembling. "Well, that was quite an honor," he said weakly. The band tried to resume music, but the rhythm faltered. I sat down again calmly, the way I would after a completed briefing. The people around me shifted, whispering. A few guests approached quietly, offering nods of respect. I acknowledged them with small gestures, nothing more. The ceremony stumbled forward, but its perfection had cracked. Caroline's smile never fully returned. When the reception began, she avoided my eyes entirely. My mother tried to repair conversation, her laughter brittle. The photographers kept shooting, unsure whether to capture the tension or pretend it hadn't happened. Hayes remained composed, standing beside his new wife, like a man fulfilling a contract. Once our eyes met again, he didn't speak, didn't need to. The salute had already said what words could not. Outside, the tide was coming in fast waves, hitting the pier in sharp succession. The horizon glowed with late afternoon light. The sound system hummed as guests began to eat, talk, recover. I stayed seated through it all, my hands resting lightly on the tablecloth, the condensation ring from my earlier glass still visible, unbroken. My mother leaned over, finally, voice low and desperate. "Why did you have to make it about you?" I looked at her steady. "I didn't," I said. He did. The truth landed between us like a quiet detonation. She looked away. The band started again, louder this time, but no amount of music could smooth the edges of that moment. For the first time all day, the air felt clean. The air inside the bridal suite was heavy with perfume and panic. Caroline stood in front of the mirror, her veil tossed onto a chair, her lipstick smeared. The sound of laughter from the reception hall drifted through the walls, muted but unmistakable. She turned as I entered her eyes, bright with fury. "You ruined my wedding," she hissed. "You couldn't stand to let me have one day, could you?" I shut the door quietly behind me. I didn't ruin anything. "Everyone's talking about you," she said, "about him saluting you like some kind of hero. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was for me?" My mother stood in the corner, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "You could have avoided all this if you had just listened," she said. "You made it about yourself." I looked at her reflection in the mirror. He made it about respect. "You just don't recognize it anymore." Caroline slammed her bouquet on the table. "Respect, you hijacked my ceremony. My friends think I'm some kind of joke now. They're posting about it already." Her voice cracked. "You should have stayed invisible." Hayes appeared at the door, still in uniform. "She didn't ruin it," he said, quietly. Truth did. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Caroline spun toward him. "You're supposed to be on my side." "I am," he said. "But that salute wasn't for her. It was for what she represents." "And what's that?" she snapped. "Everything you're not Hayes," didn't answer. He looked tired older. "You asked me once why soldiers still stand at attention for certain names," he said. "It's because we remember who earned the right to lead. Your sister did." My mother's lips tightened. "Enough," she said. "We don't air family business in front of others." "Then you should have kept it private before it became public," I replied. The silence that followed was long, the kind that reorders relationships. Hayes adjusted his cap and left the room without another word. The door clicked shut behind him. Caroline's shoulders slumped, her fury collapsing into exhaustion. "They'll never forget this," she said. "Every time someone looks up his record, your name will be there. My husband's career tied to yours." "Then he should take pride in it," I said. "He earned it honestly." "And me?" she asked bitterly. "What do I have?" I looked at her through the mirror. "A lesson. Use it." She turned away, shaking her head. "You always have to win." "No," I said. "I just stopped losing." I walked out before she could reply. The hallway outside was quiet except for the distant sound of cutlery and waves. Downstairs, the guests were still talking, the story already spreading faster than any speech could contain it. By evening, the first photo appeared online. A military blog had posted a caption beneath it. "Brigadier General attends family wedding of officer she commissioned." The image showed Hayes mid-salute my reflection. Faint in the background, Caroline blurred between us. The comments flooded in. "That's how you carry dignity. A real leader doesn't need to speak to command a room. Family politics or not, respect is earned." I turned off my phone and set it face down. Outside, the harbor was bathed in twilight. The air smelled of salt and new beginnings. The following day, another headline surfaced: "Honor meets family at Norfolk wedding." The article praised the rare grace under pressure and described the moment as a living example of humility in hierarchy. Caroline's friends stopped tagging her in photos. A few canceled plans for brunches and bridal lunches. My mother called that night. "They're saying awful things online," she said. "People don't understand context. They understand enough," I said. "They saw what they needed to see." "You embarrassed her," she insisted. "She's your sister." "And you're my mother," I said. "But you taught us to stand for what's right, remember?" There was no answer, only breathing on the line and then a quiet click as she ended the call. The next morning, an email arrived from the Department of the Army Public Affairs Office. They had seen the story. The tone was formal but approving. "Your conduct exemplified professionalism under public attention." I read it twice, then closed the laptop. Later that week, a neighbor forwarded a gossip column from a local society page. It mentioned family tension at a distinguished military ceremony and quoted unnamed guests who described Caroline as ungracious. The comments underneath were sharper. "Raised daughters who can't stand each other. Maybe parenting explains it." I didn't respond, didn't defend her. Some truths reveal themselves better in silence. 2 days later, Hayes sent a brief message, "Ma'am. Thank you for reminding me what the oath means." I replied with one line, "Lead well." That evening, I returned to Fort Belvoir. The corridors smelled of paper and coffee, familiar as heartbeat. On my desk, new commission packets waited. Fresh names, fresh beginnings. Outside the window, a flag stirred in the wind. I thought of Caroline, of the way pride can turn into blindness. I hoped someday she would learn that visibility is not victory, it's responsibility. I signed the first packet and looked at my signature. The ink dried fast, sharp, and clean. 2 months later, the Virginia heat had settled into the sidewalks like a second skin. The days were long, the kind of heavy where time felt like it was waiting for permission to move. I had just finished a briefing at Fort Belvoir when my phone rang. The name on the screen froze me for half a second. Caroline. I let it ring once before answering. Her voice came through uneven, the edges brittle. "Meredith, I need a favor," she said. "Can you help Ethan transfer to D.C.? He's been trying to get assigned closer to headquarters, but it keeps stalling. We can't afford another year in Norfolk. We need housing near the base." I leaned back in my chair. "Chain of command doesn't run through bloodlines," I said. "You know that." "I'm not asking you to break rules," she said quickly. "Just to put in a word, send a note. You know people." "I do," I said, "but they know I don't use that kind of leverage." Silence stretched, broken only by the faint hum of the air vent. Then she tried another angle. "Mom's not well," she said softly. "She's been in and out of the doctor's office. She won't tell you herself. What's wrong with her?" "They said her heart," Caroline whispered. "She's scared. She keeps asking for you." I stared at the papers on my desk, the ink from the last signature still drying. "I'll come tonight," I said. "Not for you. For her. Thank you," she said, relief flooding her voice. But under it, I heard something else. Hope for a transaction, not reconciliation. That evening, the hospital smelled of disinfectant and wilted flowers. My mother's room was dim, the blinds half drawn. Machines beeped quietly, patient as timekeepers. Caroline was there, dressed too carefully for a hospital visit. When she saw me, she stood as if bracing for inspection. "She's sleeping," she said. "She had another episode this morning. Then she needs rest, not noise," I said. Caroline folded her arms. "Ethan's orders came through," she said after a pause. "He's still in Norfolk. They didn't approve the transfer." "Then maybe he's meant to stay where he is," I said. "He earned his rank. He'll earn his reassignment, too." She sighed. "You could help. You know it. And you could stop asking." The sound of the monitor changed slightly, a small alarm chirping before settling again. My mother's eyes opened slow and unfocused at first, then sharpening when she saw me. "You came," she said, her voice thin. "I heard you weren't feeling well." "I'm fine," she said quickly. "They exaggerate." She glanced toward Caroline. "We were talking about the wedding." "Of course you were." "You embarrassed us," she said quietly. The words landed with the weight of something rehearsed. "All those people, the papers, that picture. You should have respected your sister's day." I stepped closer to the bed. "No," I said softly. I corrected the record. Caroline's breath caught. "You think that moment made you noble? It made you cruel." "Truth isn't cruelty," I said. "It's clarity. You both built a story around pretending I wasn't part of this family. I just stopped cooperating." My mother's eyes glistened. "You always have to be right." "No," I said again, "I just can't afford to be false." The machine beeped steadily between us, a mechanical metronome marking every unspoken regret. Caroline turned away, wiping her eyes. "You can't keep living like this," she said. "You'll end up alone." "Solitude and peace are not the same thing," I said. "I have one. You're still searching for the other." My mother closed her eyes again, the conversation too heavy for her pulse. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. I touched her hand gently, the skin cool, fragile. "Rest," I said. "That's all you need to do now." She didn't answer. I straightened, picked up my jacket, and turned toward the door. Caroline followed me into the hall. "You know what they're saying?" she asked. "People think I married him for connections. They say I used you. They don't invite me to events anymore. Even Mom's church friends avoid us." "Maybe now you understand what it feels like to be erased," I said. Her eyes filled again. "I didn't mean to hurt you. Intent doesn't erase impact. So, what do you want from me?" "Nothing," I said. "That's the point." The elevator bell chimed a soft metallic sound that felt like punctuation. "Take care of her," I added. "She's still your mother." Caroline bit her lip. "And you, I'll keep doing my job." The doors closed between us. Outside, the evening rain had started light and steady. The parking lot shimmered under streetlights, puddles catching reflections of red taillights. I paused beside my car, the smell of wet asphalt filling the air. The world felt cleaner after storm stripped of its pretenses. I reached into my jacket pocket and found the small insignia I had removed earlier before entering the hospital, a silver pin shaped like a star. It gleamed faintly under the rain. I fastened it back onto my lapel fingers, steady. The metal was cold against my skin, but grounding like a reminder of weight and purpose. As I walked toward the car, the rain thickened soft enough to blur edges, but not enough to hide direction. The hospital lights glowed behind me, distant and sterile. I thought of Caroline's voice, the same girl who once followed me around in my cadet jacket, who now spoke to me like a stranger. Some distances can't be measured in miles. I opened the car door, sat for a moment without starting the engine, and whispered to no one, "Mission complete." The wipers swept once, clearing the glass. Ahead, the road stretched dark and unbroken. I shifted into drive and moved forward, leaving behind the light that refused to warm. The air in Washington carried the sharpness of late summer, the kind that made uniforms feel heavier even in air-conditioned rooms. It was August 2023, and the conference hall at the National Defense Leadership Forum was filled with rows of service members, policy advisors, and reporters. The carpet was the color of discipline, gray, practical, forgettable. I stood behind the podium, the seal of the Department of Defense gleaming faintly in the light. The title on the screen behind me read Ethical Leadership and Family Dynamics in Service Life. I could see the curiosity in the room. It was not a topic often spoken aloud. The moderator introduced me as Brigadier General Meredith Vaughn, author of the new proposal for the Resilience Foundation for Women in Uniform. I thanked him, adjusted the microphone, and began. "We teach integrity as a doctrine," I said, but rarely as inheritance. "We remind soldiers to protect the nation, yet we forget to teach them how to protect themselves from silence, from bias, from the quiet corrosion that can happen at home." The room listened, the kind of silence that signals attention, not indifference. I spoke about the statistics, the strain of dual-service families, the weight of expectation placed on women who wear the uniform and carry lineage. Every rank we earn, I said, comes with unseen compromises. And yet leadership isn't about hierarchy. It's about example. I paused, scanning the faces. Some nodded, others took notes. Near the front row, I noticed Hayes among the attendees. His posture was rigid, respectful. When our eyes met, he gave the smallest nod. I continued. Ethical leadership begins where comfort ends. It means recognizing that loyalty to truth must outweigh loyalty to appearance. Applause followed, brief but sincere. After the talk, the moderator opened the floor to questions. A woman from a defense journal raised her hand. "General Vaughn," she said, "did this idea come from personal experience?" The room turned slightly toward me, sensing the invitation to gossip. I smiled, slow and measured. "Every signature carries a story," I said. Laughter rippled lightly through the crowd, but it carried warmth, not mockery. Another question came about implementation funding oversight. I answered each with precision, steering away from sentiment. The press took notes. Cameras clicked. When the session ended, officials from the Pentagon approached to congratulate me. The Deputy Secretary of Defense herself shook my hand. "Your proposal aligns with our new directives," she said. "We're approving an initial fund for the Resilience Foundation. You'll chair the Oversight Committee." For a moment, the weight of it settled in the years of quiet restraint, the discipline it took to wait until action could replace reaction. "Thank you," I said. "It's overdue, but not too late." That evening, a statement from the Department of Defense went public. The Resilience Foundation for Women in Uniform, dedicated to ethical leadership training, family support programs, and mentorship for female service members, will be launched under the supervision of Brigadier General Meredith Vaughn. The article spread quickly across official channels, then to news outlets. A photograph accompanied me at the podium, mid-sentence, the seal visible behind me. The caption read, "Leadership is not a rank. It's a responsibility." The next morning, my inbox was flooded. Old colleagues sent congratulations. Former students wrote from bases overseas. Even a few retired generals reached out, men who once underestimated me, but now addressed me with unguarded respect. Among the messages was one from a familiar name, Caroline Hayes. The subject line read, "Proud of you." The body was short. Saw the article. "You look incredible. I know we haven't talked, but Mom showed me the broadcast. I mean it. Meredith, you did it. Congratulations." I read it twice. Then I closed the message and left it unanswered. Some bridges are meant to stand empty, silent monuments to lessons learned. That afternoon, the foundation office sent over preliminary documents for review. The funding details were meticulous, the oversight transparent. I signed the approval forms and slid them into the outgoing tray. Outside my window, the city pulsed with August heat. The Washington Monument shimmered faintly in the distance, its reflection rippling in the Potomac. Hayes stopped by my office before leaving the conference. He stood at ease, the respect in his posture unforced now. "Congratulations, ma'am," he said. "The program will help a lot of people." "That's the idea," I replied. "How's the post?" "Demanding," he said, "but fair." "Good," I said. "Earn every day you serve." He smiled slightly. "I intend to." After he left, I sat for a long time, the quiet of the office wrapping around me like armor. My phone buzzed again, another message from Caroline, this time longer. "Mom's feeling better. She wants to see you. Maybe we can meet. I'd like that. I miss you." I let the screen dim. There are moments when silence speaks more honestly than forgiveness ever could. Late in the evening, I stepped outside. The air was cooler now, the city lights diffused by thin clouds. The sound of traffic blended with the low hum of cicadas. I walked toward the reflecting pool, my heels clicking softly against the pavement. The monuments stood like sentinels, patient and still. In their shadows, justice never arrived with applause. It arrived with endurance. I reached into my pocket and found the same silver insignia, now polished smooth by habit. I pinned it back onto my jacket and caught my reflection in the water. For a moment, the image of the woman looking back seemed younger, lighter. Not because the years had vanished, but because their weight finally had a purpose. I straightened my collar, took one last look at the city that had once judged me invisible, and whispered the words that had guided every chapter of my life. Mission continues. Winter had stripped Arlington bare. The grass was brittle, the air sharp enough to turn breath into smoke. Rows of headstones stretched in quiet symmetry, each one identical yet never the same. Snow clung to the corners of marble, melting where sunlight reached. I walked slowly, boots sinking slightly into the frost. My gloves were thin, the kind that let you still feel what you carry. Section 34 was near the old oak where the Marine markers lined up like ranks on parade. I had not been here since spring. The cold always made memory more precise. My father's name was etched clean and simple into the stone. Captain Daniel Vaughn, United States Marine Corps. The years of his service outlived the span of his life. I brushed the surface lightly, clearing a thin layer of snow. For a moment, I could almost hear his voice, short commands, sharp patience, the sound of boots on deck. I knelt and placed a small object against the base of the headstone. It was an old commission card, edges worn. The print faded but legible. Commissioned by Meredith Vaughn. I had found it in a drawer last week while sorting old files. It had belonged to a lieutenant I signed 15 years ago, a young officer who never came back from Helmand Province. His mother had sent the card to me later with a note that said he framed this in his room. I kept it as a reminder of the weight behind every signature. Now it rested here where my father's silence could hold it. The wind shifted, carrying faint voices. A group of new officers was crossing the section, their uniforms, crisp faces, young and untested. They noticed me and paused. One of them, barely more than 20, straightened. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, his tone formal but uncertain. "Morning," I replied. The others followed his lead, saluting in unison. I returned the gesture, precise and slow. When they passed, I watched them until the sound of their footsteps disappeared among the stones. The air grew still again. The city beyond the gates was invisible, muffled by distance and history. I sat on the small bench nearby, the kind placed for those who still needed to say things out loud. "It's done," I said softly. "All of it." The words clouded in the air before dissolving. I thought of Caroline then. The last time I saw her, she had sent a brief message through haze, a handwritten note folded neatly. It said, "I understand now. I wish I had learned earlier." I never replied. Understanding is not the same as atonement. It's just the beginning of silence learned too late. My mother had stopped calling. The last time we spoke, she mentioned church and weather, but never names. That was her form of peace, pretending the war was over. Maybe in her way it was. I looked down at the snow patterns of wind carving lines through it like maps of all the places I had once stood. War zones, ceremonies, living rooms that felt like battlefields. Justice had come quietly the way winter settles on land without asking. It hadn't roared or demanded an audience. It had saluted. That memory came back to me now, the wedding. The frozen applause, Hayes's salute, cutting through air like clarity. In that moment, the truth had stood taller than pride. I smiled faintly, the kind that comes from distance, not amusement. "Justice doesn't always shout," I said under my breath. "Sometimes it salutes." A bird landed on the next headstone, hopping once before flying off again. The sound of wings faded into the wind. The sky was the color of steel, promising more snow by evening. I stood brushing frost from my coat. My reflection flickered faintly in the polished marble of a nearby monument, older now, the lines deeper, but the posture unchanged. I fastened the silver insignia on my lapel, the same one I had worn through storms and ceremonies alike. It caught the light briefly before the clouds reclaimed it. Walking back toward the main path, I passed a family laying flowers. The youngest child waved at me without knowing why. I waved back. Beyond the gates, the hum of traffic returned soft and distant, like a reminder that life moved on even when history didn't. At the parking lot, I paused once more, looking back at the sea of markers. The snow had started again, light as breath. Each flake landed quietly, covering the ground like absolution. For the first time in months, the weight in my chest felt lighter. The wind carried the faint sound of the flag overhead snapping in rhythm. It reminded me that command was never about control. It was about steadiness, about knowing when to speak and when to stand still. I turned toward the road leading out of Arlington, the city skyline faint beyond the trees. The engine started with a low hum. As I drove, the world blurred slightly gray and white, blending into something calm. At the first stoplight, my phone vibrated with a new notification. A comment had appeared on the Resilience Foundation's latest post. "She's the kind of leader who doesn't need to raise her voice. You can feel it in how she stands." I smiled, closed the screen, and kept driving. The rain had begun to mix with snow, thin and hesitant, a reminder that seasons rarely change all at once. Somewhere behind me, the commission card rested against my father's name, 2 generations of service, folded into silence. Ahead, the road opened toward the Potomac, its surface glinting with the pale light of winter. I rolled down the window slightly, letting the cold air fill the car. "Mission complete," I whispered, but this time it sounded less like an ending and more like continuation. Then, with the quiet confidence that comes only after storms, I added the words that had closed every report I ever wrote, the same words that now felt like invitation rather than order. Have you ever been erased by your own family and still chosen dignity? Tell me below. I read every story.